Print servers in federal environments create risk and unnecessary complexity. Every new printer, location, or policy adds strain to infrastructure that was never built for today's demands. FedRAMP High Authorized Printer Logic eliminates print servers with a secure cloud-native, zero-trust solution designed for federal IT. With advanced security, centralized control, and simplified management, agencies can modernize print without added burden. See what secure serverless printing looks like. Visit Vasion.com to learn more.
Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
Trust in government has been declining for decades. A new Partnership for Public Service study asked a different question. What would a government that works for people actually look like? The answers revealed some unexpected common ground around responsiveness, effectiveness, and problem solving. Here with more insight is the Director of Public Engagement at the Partnership for Public Service, Lindsay Laferriere. Lindsay, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really glad to have you.
I'm really thrilled to be here.
The partnership does a lot of public surveys, and a lot of times those have to do with trust and how people trust their government. But in support of the 250th anniversary of the nation, you did something a little bit different. Tell us about your latest survey and how you went about it, first of all, what you were looking for.
So we knew as we approached the 250th anniversary in July that we wanted to take this moment to reflect on all of the ways our government has changed since it was founded and take that spirit in this moment when government's also undergoing a lot of change to think about what does the public really want its government to look like? And what are those principles or priorities that the public has when they think about a government that better serves them? So we undertook a survey. We also did some work on social media, and we had a public input forum where we asked people a couple of questions. A government that better serves you, fill in the blank. In 2055, a government that's working, fill in the blank. And then we took all of those responses, we analyzed them, and we came up with 6 priorities for how the public thinks a government could better serve them.
That is fascinating. I bet you got things that were all over the spectrum, but those 6 priorities use words that could mean lots of different things to different people. So walk us through what they are and how people defined those terms.
Yeah, so like we said, we had 6 priorities. So the first was a government that understands and is responsive to the needs of the average American. So this was really, it came through particularly in ways people were reflecting. They didn't feel like government was really listening to them, didn't really reflect the policies and practices of government, didn't really seem to be meeting their needs. So that was really the overwhelming feeling there. The second priority was a government that serves the public good over the wealthy special interests and corporations. There was a lot of responses where it felt like my voice is not as important as someone, a lobbyist who has a member of Congress's ear or these people I'm seeing in the news. So it was really about how do we make sure the public good comes before everything else. The third priority was around a government that effectively identifies and solves the country's greatest problems. So these were things like education, healthcare, housing, and some of the respondents even called out they felt like government was doing things only around the edges to deal with these really complex and foundational problems in our country. The fourth priority was a government in which leaders work collaboratively in order to get things done. So there's this feeling that that many leaders in government were putting party above the public interest or letting some of this kind of polarization in our country defeat potential solutions. The fifth priority was a government that is representative of the average American. So some of this was traditional demographic representation, so age, race or ethnicity, gender. But a lot of it was also socioeconomic. They wanted more what they thought of as middle-class Americans representing them in government, or people who didn't have a college degree. And then the last was a government that is effective and efficient. So a government that uses taxpayer dollars well. So like you said, these can all mean different things to different people. But for us, it also showed there's a lot of common ground. So how do we use these areas where there is common ground to find the reforms that will help make government represent them?
To that point, as folks were giving you these answers, did they suggest any specific practices or scenarios that would illustrate what they meant by those words?
Yeah, so there were a few ways in which that came through. So for the first priority around a government that understands and responds to people's needs, there were instances where people said, like, maybe we should create processes where a new policy or law is introduced, and there's an area where the public can give direct feedback on that before it goes through. People who follow a government know there is a public comment period when the federal government puts out new rules. I don't think a lot of members of the public are aware that that's available to them. And then there were also some typical reforms when you think about Congress that have seemed to have broken through. So there were term limits for elected members. There were also things like getting rid of Citizens United. So there are some, political and congressional reforms that seem to have broken into the public, but not as much on the federal management side that seemed to have gotten to people.
I'm speaking with Lindsay Laferriere. She's the Director of Public Engagement at the Partnership for Public Service. Lindsay, after reading all of this input, and you got feedback from 1,400 people or so.
Yes, yeah.
What do you think government leaders either misunderstand or underemphasize when it comes to what people are actually asking for?
I think there is, and very fairly, an emphasis on administrative services. So things that people directly interact with the federal government to access, applying for a passport, getting Social Security benefits, which are very important. But a lot of the feedback we saw were the bigger fundamental issues with how our government operates. And that seemed to be where there was this desire for government to work differently. So I think there's sometimes the instinct that if we improve service delivery, things will be better. And that is an important part of the equation. But there are these broader dynamics at play. The partnership's been looking at public views of government since 2021. We are about to, in a couple of weeks, release a new report looking at that's 5 years and the data we found. And there's definitely trends where there's this disconnect between satisfaction with some of the work government does, and then these underlying tensions about government truly solving some of those big problems. So I think that's something to keep aware of. How do you keep doing the good service work and then also fix some of these more broader questions?
Where do you think that disconnect comes from? Is it just easier to focus on service delivery than on constitutional change?
I think some of the, in working with federal employees closely, I think some of those are really difficult. So when you talk about a government that understands and listens to the public, we know from working with federal employees, there are a lot of rules about how federal agencies can get input from the public that require, reform and rethinking. So some of this is just the system is not built to do some of these things. So that's why, the partnership is working on an issue called Government for a New Era, which is really thinking about what are those structural reforms we need to make some of these types of priorities possible for the federal employees who are trying to deliver on them.
You mentioned up front that we are used to dealing with the polarization and political division here. As you looked through the responses, did you see that in the responses? Or, could you tell, for example, which party someone came from by their answer? Or was there really, when you got down to the bottom of it, pretty common perspective?
It was actually one of the things that was most surprising to us in the analysis. My colleague who did most of the analysis said we were surprised at how little partisan politics were named in the answers. So there was a lot of reflection on, politicians or members of Congress should do this differently, but they didn't call out many politicians by name or imply that it was a certain party that was to blame. So it really was this belief that the system overall needed to do more to center the public as opposed to one party over the other, which is encouraging when you think about the broad coalition of people. We need to be active in creating a better government for us all, that it's not about kind of that division. It can really be an effort that is nonpartisan.
So as you're coming away from this project and obviously starting others, did you come away more optimistic or more concerned about the prospects for improving public confidence in government?
So as an organization, I think we always try to be optimistic and what are the solutions we can build. But I think especially the last part of the report looked at how are people currently and how do they plan to engage with improvements to government. And we were really encouraged by the percentage of people, which for many of the areas we looked at, so we talked about things like voting, talking with your family and friends about reforms to government, sharing on social media. And for many of those, more than half of the people we surveyed said it was either something they had done in the last last year, or it's something they plan to do in the coming time. So that means to us, that says there is a group of the public out there that is eager to work to make our government better. And it's up to us to seize that opportunity to really get them engaged and involved in this effort to create a better government for all of us.
And what happens next with these findings? Are you going to dig deeper and get more specific? Are you trying to share them more broadly? Where do they go from here?
So the partnership continues to do research on public perceptions of government. So this is a really helpful tool for us to further investigate in future surveys and focus groups. In practical terms, what are the reforms that would get to these 6 priorities? So how do we start to build some real plans for bringing these to life? But it also continues to be a conversation. We want to invite more organizations in. How are they thinking about the ways that government can better serve the public along these priorities? So it will continue to be an ongoing project for us.
Lindsay Laferriere is the Director of Public Engagement at the Partnership for Public Service. Lindsay, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
We'll post this interview and a link to the report at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Listen to the Federal Drive on your schedule. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.